So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Hello and welcome. I am Logan, today's host on Otherworldly Podcast.
And I am Drag, the co-host for this episode.
So we'll talk about our mission a little bit here. Drag, would you like to explain our mission?
Sure. So we are starting off with this podcast to share the truth of the gospel in a relatable way and to foster fellowship among fellow Christians.
Yeah, and I'd say that honestly explains it perfectly. That kind of leads us into where this podcast comes from and what it is for us. The birth of our podcast is kind of a fun topic because it's been a long time coming. We've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. We've attempted smaller things in the past and nothing really ever worked out. Honestly, this is just something we've both wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah, I kept pestering you for quite some time about it.
Probably about, I don't even know, multiple years at least.
Yeah, I feel like about 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
And I've been wanting to do a podcast for a long time, but it just never panned out in the long run. Like to really get it up and going with anyone else. So, and you ended up becoming my target.
And I've been interested in doing a podcast for a while. It's just never really finding the time to actually sit down and do it. I think one time we were having a discussion on doing a podcast, and you mentioned to me how you actually sat down and calculated your time on a spreadsheet, and you said you can find time in things that you will never even know you have time for. I was like, I'm not doing that. That sounds silly. But I ended up actually looking into that more and sitting down and really dedicating some time into finding time.
That was actually my first semester of school.
Really?
Yeah, of going back to school. That was one of the things that I learned that they encouraged us to do, is to break down our days so that we know how to appropriately spend what's an appropriate amount of time to spend studying and also focusing on our mental health and taking care of ourselves and having an appropriate life.
That was probably about 3.5 years ago that you brought that up.
Did it? I mean, I did skip a few semesters, so was it that long ago?
Yeah.
Because I could have sworn I started school literally 2 years ago.
I mean,
2.5 years ago.
Really?
Either way.
Regardless, it's been a long time coming, and I think that was around the time where you really started talking to me about doing a podcast. It was around that time that you brought it up. It might have actually been in that conversation. If I remember correctly, you might have brought up doing a podcast, and I told you I don't have time. And I think that's when you told me that you can find time.
Yeah, because so many people tell me, "Oh, I don't know, I don't have the time," and I just want to look at them and be like, "You're full of it."
Yeah, that's the biggest response I hear from people is that you don't have time.
Because I make the same excuses, and then when I really stop and look, I'm like, I have the freaking time. What am I complaining about?
Yeah, everybody really has the time, especially if you look at your screen time and you see that, you've been spending 3 hours on TikTok or 3 hours on YouTube Shorts or whatever you prefer to watch.
It's funny talking to my aunts and my grandmother because they say you don't call me enough. And I'm like, you spend too much time on your phone. And they're the 2 generations before me.
Yeah, I don't think...
And I'm like, and you're looking at the phone. I'm not.
There is not
What's going on here? This is backwards.
Exactly. There is not a generation that's exempt from the screen time.
Yeah.
There is not a generation exempt from it.
Though I will say that it's certainly the older generations have a lower percentage of people, but they can still just as easily fall victim to it. It's just that many of them aren't as tech literate.
Right.
Tech literacy is lower in that generation, which causes less screen time, at least when it comes to things like computers and smartphones.
Right. Yeah. No.
These, though,
definitely seen that.
If you're retired, you're probably watching a lot of TV.
Oh yeah, everyone loves that legacy media, right?
Oh yeah.
So this podcast is coming out in December, so obviously we have to touch the birth of Christ. That's why I referenced our podcast. It's the starting of our podcast being the birth of our podcast. Kind of associate the two things. What do you think the birth of Christ was what do you think it was and for humanity, and what do you think it is for you today?
So from my point of view, the birth of just the birth of Christ represents a time of like how do I want to word it? Like a just like birth and I'm gonna quote Lion King here, okay? So the circle of life, man was made from clay. We were made from the dirt, right?
Right.
And woman from man from the rib. So to me, birth is kind of the same. That's birth is a part of the cycle of life of individuals and as humanity. And Christ is even more special of a birth. Despite birth being this huge important thing, Christ was even more of an important thing.
Absolutely.
And it's a huge symbol of what he literally stood for of he was born into this world and died for our sins. So the sin, not the sin, at the start where he was born
Hmm.
is the first page in the book of once upon a time there was this little baby in a manger.
Right.
Like it's where this whole cycle of renewal that we're just here temporarily, that we're because of the fall of man, we are born of sin, but through Christ we can be free of that. And so that it's the start of that journey is how I see it.
Beautifully said. I think Luke 2:11 really sums it up perfectly. It's today in the town of David, a savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. And that is a clear and it's a perfect explanation of what Jesus Christ's birth on earth is for humanity and what it is for me. He is the Messiah, the Lord, the Savior of all, and he came here to die for our sins, just like you said. I think that is a perfect explanation. So, interesting question. Why would you think it is? Why do you think it was in Bethlehem?
That is a very good question. And I'm willing to admit that I actually do not have an answer to that question.
There,
I feel like I should know it, and I feel like I've heard it before.
yeah, there's definitely
Just one of those details, I'm just drawing a blank.
like specific details that I think God implements throughout the Bible, where like you might hear it, especially if you went to Sunday school, you might hear it your whole life, and you don't fully think, why is it the way it was? Like, why did that happen the way it did?
Mhm.
And why was Christ born into Bethlehem? Well, if you think about it, I believe that there's actually a prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. And as well as that, King David was raised, I can't remember if he was born in Bethlehem, but it was definitely his town.
Mhm.
That is where he came up, where he came from. He was in the town of Bethlehem, and that a lot of people at the time considered that David's town. And there was a census that was ordered by Augustus, I think it was, and all of the people had to go back to their ancestors' hometowns to be involved in the census, which is kind of a weird concept because if I had to go back to my ancestors' hometown, like how far back do you go? What makes you decide that here's where I'm going to stop on my ancestors' lineage to go be in this part of the census? Because I could go, obviously, I live in the United States, so I could go all the way back to a different country if I went back far enough, or even stay here in the United States and certain lineages. So it's an interesting aspect. But they went back to Bethlehem, both Mary and Joseph, and it was to fulfill one of the prophecies. One of the many, I think it's almost 300 prophecies that Jesus Christ fulfilled in his life, in his short 33 years on this earth. The most fulfilled life anybody could live, truly, though. Yeah. What do you think about the wise men? I know we've talked in the past about what the wise men are, the magi.
Yeah, I was about to say, They're called the wise men in the children's version of the story.
Right.
They were actually culturally wise, would have been called magi back in the day,
Hmm.
or something based on that, some derivative of that. There were a lot of variants, but magi being the standard one that we have in the modern sense.
Right.
What was your question again?
Just what do you think about them?
Oh, what do I think about them? Well, I think that they definitely were an interesting group of fellows.
That
And there are some things in the story, and I am not here to say that the Bible is wrong or that what the Bible is saying is wrong. It's just that there are a lot of details that the Bible leaves out because they're not necessarily important to like the actual message of the story and things like that. Where it's actually believed that they may not have actually physically been there, that they actually arrived late.
hmm
And then they had to send messengers ahead, couriers ahead with the gifts to go and find them. So they were there at the manger, but they weren't there at the moment of the birth.
So they were late.
Yeah, it was a timing thing. And the way the Bible words it, it's kind of ambiguous. Like, it's like they were there, but they weren't. It's like, and through all the various translations and everything, it's like the way it's worded is kind of weird. Like, it's somewhere in translation, there's a potential that the story got mixed up through translation and they weren't even there when he was born.
Well, I've also heard, I know we say the three wise men, but I've also heard that there's possibility for them to be, there was many of them. There was more than three.
Yeah, so I mean, magi, they were like important figures.
Right.
So they weren't necessarily rulers, though.
Hmm.
To my knowledge, and I'm actually going to glance over here at the Wikipedia just to fact check myself really quick. Yeah, they were just like religious figures. That's all they were.
I heard,
Magi is usually often associated with things like Arabia and like Aladdin, for example, is a fictional story example of like, and you have like all the Arabian Night, everything like that kind of culture.
almost like
Right from.
a different cultural version of what today's version of like a entrepreneur would be, almost like somebody who's a little more advanced in specific things, and they're involved a lot in, I'm not even sure. I've heard that it was possible that some of them were involved in studying stars and studying constellations, and that might have assisted in them seeing the star.
Okay, continue.
But
We just had a cat come across the scene.
had to walk across the keyboard.
Yeah, had to come right across the keyboard as I'm pulling up some things really quick to fact check myself before I say anything more.
Right. I pulled up here Matthew 2 a little bit ago. This was the Magi visit the Messiah after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and Jerusalem with him. I think for being called wise men, that was pretty dumb.
Yeah.
Why would you go to the King of the Jews to go say, "We heard the King of the Jews was born. Where is he?" You really think that this guy, and this guy was not just just an average king. He was a jerk. Like he was a jerk. The people hated him, and they did not like him. I find it odd that they came to King Herod for advice on that, and why they didn't just go to seek him out throughout the community instead. That's an odd choice on my part. And the fact that they could just go up to the king, that would also mean that they probably had some pull, that they had, not necessarily royalty, but they definitely had some importance.
Yeah. So archaically, magi is a magician or a sorcerer.
Ah,
And later on, and this is the more used definition in the modern day, When it's used, it's in reference to a member of the priestly caste of ancient Persia.
Hmm. I did hear that it's suspected that they came from Persia.
Yep. So a magi is from Persia, which is modern day Iran and surrounding areas.
Right. Right.
But the Iranian people, a lot of them refer to themselves as Persians. They're Persian. They're the Persian ethnicity of the Persian people, not Iranians. That's just what us Westerners call them.
Right.
But they identify as Persians. The people from the Persian Empire, like they're the descendants of them.
That's an interesting concept. I mean, considering the Persian Empire was gone so long ago, that's neat. I did not know that.
Well, the Persians came back in multiple ways, not necessarily as the Persian Empire, but with the rise of Islam and the Islamic Golden Age, the Persian people were very prominent during that time as well. And they've had an ebb and flow over time, like every culture in history, like their highs and lows.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. As for the three wise men, have you heard of them having names?
I'm not aware of them having specific individual names. Also, magi is actually a plural.
As in, like multiple? Or
Yeah, it's the plural form. It's actually what was it? I closed that. Hang on. Let me pull it back up.
well, when it's used, I've always heard it referred to as the Magi. So I mean, I've never.
Yeah, so it's saying the Magi, meaning like
as in
the
many.
people.
Yeah, I've never assumed it to be
or the priests.
At least three.
And it's a magus. Magus is an individual, a single magus, and they are a magi. And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. But
So where does the word magi specifically come from?
Okay, so it started with an Old Persian as the singular form of magus, and then it went through Greek and it looks like it got influences from Latin when it went into Greek, and then got moved into Middle English.
And it was somewhere in there where it actually went from being a singular to a plural use.
Well, no, it started off as the singular of magus, and the plural was magi.
Oh, okay. I get you.
Yeah. But it traveled from Old Persian through Greek, and then, of course, Greek and Latin heavily influenced each other culturally, religiously, and linguistically.
Right.
So there are a lot of similarities there in that sense, or at least for the ancient versions of languages. And then, yeah, by the time in the Middle English, it was with an unaccented S of magus. In Old Persian, it was accented, the S at the end.
Wonder what that sounds like.
And just for our listeners, just to let you know, I am simply a word nerd.
Word nerd.
Yeah. Or etymology. I watch a lot of etymology videos, and specifically, there's a podcast out there.
Yeah, I mean, I like learning words, but I've never really, it's something that's interesting to me, but it's not something that fascinates me in the same way it does you. It's definitely something that's interesting and good to know, because understanding how words come from, where they come from, can help you understand what meanings of things. But
a huge percentage of the modern English language is French, is Old French.
Old French.
Not the same as modern French. Right. Modern French came from Old French, and a lot of the modern day English language came from Old French as well. So there are words that in modern French went a completely different direction than the words in English that were taken from Old French, and they evolved in two different directions from Old French.
Huh.
But obviously English didn't start that way.
So I know if you know Spanish, you can likely understand a good bit of Italian, as well as, not as much, but some Portuguese as well.
Yeah, so my uncle, he's not fluent in Spanish, but he understands enough to usually slide on by sometimes. And he can usually pick up, like he spoke to someone who was speaking Portuguese one time, and he actually caught a few words that he did recognize, and they were similar enough to Spanish to where he got the basic meaning of like what they were at, like the subject kind of thing.
Interesting. So, what would you say? This is off topic, but what would you say is the closest thing for English's counterpart? I mean, we have our dialects and our different accents, but
I want to say that the closest that with modern English, including all dialects of where English is a majority spoken language. So the UK, the US, Australia, Canada,
right.
like the English speaking countries. I don't know. It's a really good question.
Because I've never, I mean, I know what a cognate is, and it's typically a word that sounds similar or is pronounced almost exactly the same, and it means similar things in two different languages.
Yeah. So the issue is with the modern English language being a large chunk of words evolved from Old French, and Old French being English is a North Germanic language.
Mhm.
French is a Romance language, meaning it comes from Latin. English does not come from Latin. It comes from Proto-Germanic. Two completely different families of languages.
Interesting.
And so English is this weird hybrid of at its roots, it's a North Germanic language with relations to Old Norse and like the early forms of Swedish and Danish, like the Scandinavian languages, because the Anglos and the Saxons and the Jutes invaded from what is now northern Germany and Denmark.
Interesting.
So they took very early Scandinavian language to the British Isles, kicked out a bunch of the natives that were Celtic and Gaelic peoples, or rather took over, and then eventually the Normans, who were Viking French settlers, they were Vikings who settled in France and joined France and then became royalty and then invaded up, and French was added in, so it became really weird.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely
But the closest that it's related to at its core would be Northern Germanic languages, like Scandinavian languages.
Huh.
There's actually a lot, like if you look at German and Dutch and Danish and such, you will actually see a lot of similarities if you really look close enough to English at its base.
Yeah, I've never looked into it that deep. That's definitely interesting.
I just feel that, like, I find that it helps with research and understanding a culture and the history, seeing how cultures influenced each other.
Yeah, that's definitely an important aspect of life and understanding what that culture was going through and what they're doing, especially within the Bible, understanding the culture of what Israel was and the different cultures surrounding Israel.
Since we're on the topic of etymology, do you want to, and where the actual theme of this episode is the birth of Christ, you want to talk about the birth of the word Jesus?
Yeah.
And like the evolution of that.
Absolutely.
So it started off in Hebrew and Aramaic, which ancient Hebrew was very, very, very similar to Aramaic. You could have an Aramaic speaker understand a Hebrew person and vice versa. That's how close they were. They were basically like what we were just talking about, how some languages like Portuguese and Spanish, they're very closely related.
Right. Jesus most likely spoke mostly Aramaic.
Yeah, Aramaic / early Hebrew.
Right.
But Jesus and the people at the time would have also most likely have spoken Greek. Sure, they were ruled over by Rome, but the most influence they were receiving culturally at the time, they were ruled by Rome, but they had a lot of Hellenistic influence at the time.
I believe most
Greece.
Most of what Paul wrote was in Greek.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Hellenistic means like the ancient Greek religion and the ancient Roman religion. They're considered that's like Hellenistic. I can't remember the exact breakdown of that word and its actual etymology sense, but yeah, so it would have started off at...
I have the definition here. Hellenistic relating to Greek history, language, and culture from the death of Alexander the Great to the death of Cleopatra and Mark Antony by Octavian in 31 BC.
Yep. So it's like that era period of time and those roles and that way of religious life, and when it was almost like a golden age. Meanwhile, even though there was a lot of war and fighting, but cultural, like a cultural golden age, a real boom happened with it, and that's like that.
Pretty much right before the birth of Christ up until 31 years prior to his birth.
Yeah, and so like a lot of those influences were still there.
Yeah.
It just wasn't part of that same old era.
Yeah, that's basically like his grandparents, essentially.
But yeah, so it started off as Yeshua. Yeshua.
Right.
In Hebrew/Aramaic. And then in Greek, I'm probably going to butcher this. I'm really hoping I get this right. It's Easaus. See, I've gotten conflicting pronunciations for this.
Right.
I've gotten some that say it's just Esaus, and others that add an AY for the pronunciation in between. Like it's Easaus. Instead of just Esaus, it's like Easaus. Almost.
That's interesting.
And it could have very well been both, and it was taken from Greek into Latin with the same pronunciation. It's just that they removed the O. Latin tended to not use as many O's and things.
I mean, if I look at it, it looks like Iesous.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right, but I'm not real knowledgeable on how to pronounce Greek.
But yeah, Eosaus, and then into Latin, and the accent may have changed to it, but generally, from what my research showed me, is that the pronunciation was basically the same. Like imagine an British person and an American person saying the exact same word, both the exact same way. You're still going to have that accent. So
that
difference.
He was most likely called Eosaus then.
Yes.
At the time.
Yep. He was likely called Eosaus by the greater society because of the Greek influence. But more personally, he was probably actually at birth named Yeshua.
Yeshua. I've heard of Yeshua. I've actually never heard
that
of
was Jesus's family's and people's, the Jews' native tongue.
But yeah, that was their tongue.
But when it came to being ruled over, he was most likely called Eosaus, both in Greek and Latin. And then in English, we got from Eosaus the IE going into JE, the S to the S, and the US to the US. So instead of Eosaus, it's just Jesus.